You've been lied to. They told you that forgiveness is virtue, that endless chances prove your moral superiority, that forgiving the same person repeatedly, despite their repeated betrayals, makes you enlightened and spiritually evolved. Every time you forgave them without consequences, you weren't building respect. You were teaching people how to use you. Every time you allowed someone back into your life after they hurt you, promising this time will be different, you reinforced a dangerous lesson. There are no real consequences for hurting you. Here's what they don't tell you. When you forgive without boundaries, without consequences, without requiring genuine change, you're not being kind. You're being complicit. You're actively training people to continue the same behavior because they've learned the most important lesson. You'll always take them back. Your forgiveness becomes predictable. Your compassion becomes exploitable. Your goodness becomes a trap. They walk through repeatedly because they know you'll be waiting on the other side to welcome them back. And the worst part, you probably don't even realize it's happening. Every cycle of forgiveness feels like you're being the bigger person. Every reconciliation feels like you're choosing love over bitterness. Every fresh start feels like spiritual growth. But what you're actually doing is creating a system where change is unnecessary. Why would they change when they've already learned that no matter what they do, you'll forgive them without requiring them to become better? I am Niccolò Machiavelli. 500 years ago, I watched rulers repeat the same mistake. They'd punish betrayal once, then forgive the betrayer when they promised reform. They'd welcome the traitor back. The traitor would betray again, and the ruler would forgive again. Weakness disguised as compassion. Mercy that destroyed kingdoms. I learned something critical. Forgiveness without consequences isn't mercy. It's permission. Permission to continue. Permission to hurt again. Permission to never change. In this video, I'm going to share 7 brutal truths about how cycles of repeated forgiveness teach people that change is optional. This isn't about becoming a cold, unforgiving person. This is about protecting your goodness by making it powerful. About learning that true compassion requires boundaries. About understanding that the kindest thing you can do for someone sometimes is to say no and mean it, and that the most important person to protect is yourself. The mercy that destroys Machiavelli lived in Renaissance Italy, surrounded by rulers who believed that forgiveness demonstrated strength. They'd been betrayed, they'd forgiven, and they'd been betrayed again. He watched this cycle repeat across kingdoms until it became clear. Forgiveness without consequences isn't strength. It's a vulnerability being weaponized against you. Human psychology hasn't changed. When someone learns they can hurt you and be forgiven without real cost, they've learned the most dangerous lesson. Your standards are negotiable. Your boundaries are suggestions. Your pain doesn't matter, because you'll absorb it and welcome them back anyway. You've trained them to believe that your goodness is infinite and therefore exploitable. Most people think forgiveness means trusting again immediately, that it means erasing the hurt and pretending it never happened, that it means giving unlimited chances. But forgiveness and reconciliation are different. You can forgive someone internally without ever letting them back into your life. True healing doesn't require you to repeatedly expose yourself to the same person who hurt you. Now, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I protect my goodness with powerful boundaries. 1. They learn that apologies replace action. Let's start with something uncomfortable. When someone apologizes to you without changing their behavior, and you accept that apology and welcome them back, you've just taught them that words replace actions. That saying, "I'm sorry," is sufficient payment for causing you pain. That they don't need to actually change anything. Because the apology itself is the commodity you accept in exchange for access to your life. Think about the last time someone hurt you repeatedly. Did they apologize each time? Did the apology feel sincere? And did you forgive them based on their words while their actions remained unchanged? If you answered yes, you've been caught in a trap where apologies become currency and change becomes optional. Here's what happens when you reward apologies without requiring behavioral change. People learn that they can hurt you, say sorry, and restart the cycle. The apology becomes a reset button they press whenever things get uncomfortable. They're not apologizing because they're remorseful. They're apologizing because they've learned it works. They've learned that you'll accept their words as evidence of change when they haven't changed at all. When someone apologizes repeatedly for the same behavior, they're not demonstrating remorse. They're demonstrating that they know exactly what to say to manipulate you back into compliance. They're performing the ritual of apology while calculating how soon they can betray you again. Machiavelli once said, "Men are so simple and obedient to present necessities that he who deceives will always find someone who will let himself be deceived." Your willingness to accept apologies without requiring change has made you predictable. They know exactly what to say. They know the formula. Apologize, watch you melt with compassion, return to the behavior, apologize again when caught. It's a system with no friction, because you keep removing the consequences. Most people confuse apologies with transformation. They think if someone says they're sorry, change must be happening. Powerful people understand something different. Apologies are cheap. Actual behavioral change is expensive. It requires effort, discomfort, and sustained discipline. When you accept apologies without requiring that expense, you're signaling that you don't expect them to pay the real price of change. One approach says, "Your words are enough." The other says, "Show me your actions, not your regret." One enables repetition. The other forces genuine change or abandonment. Let me give you a concrete scenario. Your friend cancels plans on you repeatedly. Each time they apologize sincerely, explaining their stress, their circumstances, their good intentions. Each time you forgive them and welcome them back. By the 10th cancellation and apology, they've learned that your time isn't valuable enough to require them to follow through. Your forgiveness has taught them that cancelling and apologizing is an acceptable pattern. No real change ever occurs because change isn't required. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're training people to apologize better, not to behave better. Your repeated forgiveness has made them excellent at the performance of remorse while remaining unchanged in their actions. The tragedy is that you think accepting their apology proves your spiritual evolution. It doesn't. It proves you've been manipulated into a system where words replace accountability. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I require action, not apologies. 2. Boundaries become jokes. They can cross repeatedly. Here's a question most people avoid asking themselves. What happens after you set a boundary with someone and they cross it? Do you reinforce the boundary firmly? Or do you forgive the boundary violation and welcome them back into your life anyway? If you're forgiving boundary violations without consequences, you've just announced that your boundaries are decorative, that they're nice ideas you mention but don't actually enforce, that people can step over them repeatedly because you keep pulling them back anyway. Think about the people in your life who consistently disrespect your stated boundaries. They arrive late to meetings despite knowing punctuality matters to you. They bring up topics you've said are off limits. They involve themselves in decisions you've asked them not to touch. They interrupt your time and energy repeatedly despite your explicit requests. Now ask yourself, have you consistently reinforced those boundaries, or have you forgiven the violations and allowed them back without real consequences? Here's what happens when you forgive boundary violations repeatedly. Boundaries stop meaning anything. They become performance rather than protection. You might say, "Don't call me after 9 p.m." But when someone calls at 10 p.m. and you forgive them without consequences, you've just communicated that your stated boundary is negotiable, that you say things you don't mean, that boundaries are suggestions. When someone tests your boundaries and you forgive them without consequences, they've learned something critical. You're not serious. They're not even trying to respect you at that point. They're testing how much they can push, and each forgiveness teaches them they can push further. Machiavelli understood this. Injuries should be inflicted all at once, so that their ills savour being less lasting, may give less offence. But boundaries don't work that way. Boundaries require consistent enforcement, or they dissolve entirely. When you set a boundary and then violate it through your own forgiveness, you've destroyed it completely. Most people set boundaries, but don't enforce them. They communicate their limits but then forgive violations. They say what matters to them, but then welcome boundary crossers back without requiring changed behaviour. They've created a system where their stated limits are fiction. Powerful people do something different. They set boundaries clearly, forgive internally if they choose to, but don't reconcile with someone until that person has demonstrated they can respect the boundary. They understand that boundaries without consequences are just wishes. One approach says, "My boundaries are flexible if you're charming enough." The other says, "Crossing my boundaries has a cost, so cross carefully or don't cross at all." One invites continued violation. The other demands respect. Let me give you a practical scenario. You tell your partner you need alone time on Sunday mornings. It's important to you. It's a boundary. The first Sunday, they violate it, making plans for both of you. You forgive them. The second Sunday, they do it again. You forgive them again. By the third Sunday, they know that your stated boundary means nothing. They've tested it repeatedly, and you've made it clear through your repeated forgiveness that their violation is acceptable to you. Here's the brutal truth. Your willingness to forgive boundary violations has taught people that your boundaries don't protect anything. They protect you only if you're willing to enforce them through consequences. Without that, they're just words you use to feel like you have control you don't actually have. The tragedy is that you think forgiving shows strength. It doesn't. It shows you haven't developed the spine to protect yourself. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My boundaries are sacred. Violations have costs. 3. Change becomes impossible because motivation disappears. Here's something nobody wants to admit. If someone can hurt you repeatedly and be forgiven without real consequences, what motivation do they have to change? Why would they transform themselves if the current system rewards them perfectly? Think about this logically. Someone betrays you, lies to you, manipulates you, disappoints you, takes advantage of you. But then they apologize, you forgive them, and they're back in your life with the same access, the same trust, the same emotional capital. From their perspective, what's broken? What needs fixing? Why would they invest energy in becoming better when the current arrangement benefits them? Here's what happens when you create systems without consequences. You eliminate the primary motivation for change. People change when staying the same becomes unbearable, when the cost of their behavior exceeds the benefit, when they lose access to things they value. But if you keep granting them access regardless of their behavior, you've eliminated the cost. You've made the current arrangement perfectly comfortable for them. Why would they change? When you forgive the same person repeatedly for the same betrayal, you're not giving them grace. You're removing the pressure that would force them to transform. You're saying, through your actions, I love you exactly as you are, even when as you are means hurting me. And they hear that loud and clear. Machiavelli once said, "There is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to lead the introduction of a new order of things. Change is difficult. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself. It requires discipline and sustained effort. Most people won't do it unless they're forced to. And you're forcing them to do the opposite by forgiving them and leaving everything the same. Most people believe that unconditional love motivates change. That if someone knows they're loved despite their flaws, they'll eventually choose to improve. This is backward. People change when unconditional love becomes conditional on change. When they understand that your access, your trust, your emotional investment in them depends on them becoming better. Powerful people understand forgiveness and reconciliation are different tools. You can forgive someone internally without restoring them to their previous position in your life. You can love someone without giving them the opportunity to hurt you again. You can wish them well while also choosing to protect yourself by maintaining distance until they've genuinely transformed. One system says, I forgive you, everything is the same as before. The other says, I forgive you internally, but you need to rebuild my trust through consistent changed behavior. One enables stagnation. The other creates pressure for actual transformation. Let me give you a concrete scenario. Your family member drinks heavily and treats you poorly when intoxicated. They apologize the next day, you forgive them, and everything restarts. Years pass. They never change because they've learned that forgiveness equals restoration. There's no cost to their drinking, no loss of relationship access, no pressure to seek help. If you'd instead forgiven internally, but said, I love you, but I won't be around you while you're drinking, suddenly they'd have motivation. Their behavior would have a consequence, and change might actually become possible. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your repeated forgiveness is actively preventing the person from changing. You're making it so comfortable for them to stay the same that they have no motivation to become better. The tragedy is that you think you're helping them through your forgiveness. You're actually trapping them in repetition because you've removed the consequence that would push them toward growth. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. Consequences create change. Forgiveness enables stagnation. 4. You become a parking space for their abuse. Here's the brutal reality nobody talks about. When you repeatedly forgive someone without requiring change or enforcing real consequences, you become a designated space where they can safely deposit their worst behavior. You become a parking space for their abuse. They know exactly what you'll tolerate. They've tested it. They've learned it. And now they use you as a pressure valve, where they can release their worst impulses knowing you'll absorb it, forgive it, and welcome them back. You've become a repository for behavior they'd never display with people they actually respect. Think about the people who treat you worst. Are they typically people who face no consequences? Or are they people who fear losing you? The answer is probably the first one. The people who hurt you most are often people who've learned they can do so without real repercussions. They've learned they can be cruel to you and you'll still let them back in. Here's what happens when you become this parking space. They get worse. They test the limits more aggressively. They escalate because they know you're a safe landing space. They know you'll absorb it. They might feel guilty briefly, apologize, and then repeat the pattern because the system is working perfectly for them. They get to release their worst self, then reset with you. It's efficient. It's comfortable. It's exploitative. When you repeatedly forgive without consequences, people stop seeing you as someone to respect and start seeing you as someone to use. Your kindness becomes evidence of weakness. Your forgiveness becomes permission. Your endless chances become a guarantee that they can always come back. Machiavelli would observe, "He who controls perception controls power." When someone perceives you as endlessly forgiving, they perceive you as powerless, and they treat you accordingly. They use your goodness as a playground because they know you won't ever truly fight back. You'll absorb, forgive, and reset. Most people don't realize when they've become this parking space. They think they're being spiritual or enlightened. They think their forgiveness proves their evolution. They don't realize they're training people to treat them worse because the person now knows there are literally no consequences. Powerful people draw a line, not in anger, not in bitterness, but clearly. They say, "I love you, but I won't absorb this behavior anymore. When you're ready to change, I'm here. But until then, distance is the kindest thing I can offer." They stop being a parking space. They become someone who requires respect. One system says, "You can treat me however you want, I'll always forgive." The other says, "Treat me with respect or lose access to me." One enables abuse. The other demands dignity. Let me give you a specific example. Your sibling constantly criticizes you, dismisses your accomplishments, and makes cutting remarks. You've talked to them repeatedly. They apologize each time. You forgive each time. By now, they've learned that criticism has zero cost. They can mock you, feel briefly guilty, apologize, and repeat. You've become the family parking space where their insecurities get deposited daily. And it's not getting better, because you've created a system where it doesn't need to. Here's the brutal truth. People don't stop abusing parking spaces. They keep using them because that's what parking spaces are for. You should need to stop being available as a place for their behavior to land. The tragedy is that you think protecting them by forgiving them serves them. It doesn't. It enables them to become worse versions of themselves because you keep removing consequences. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I refuse to be a parking space for anyone's behavior. 5. They learn your kindness is your weakness. Here's something critical most people don't understand. People study you. They watch how you respond. They catalogue your reactions. And they use that information strategically. When someone learns that your kindness is your defining characteristic, they've learned your primary vulnerability. Think about the people who hurt you most. Do they exploit your kindness? Do they apologize in ways they know will make you cry? Do they promise change in ways they know appeal to your hope? Do they frame their behavior in ways that minimize their culpability while maximizing your compassion? If you answered yes, they've learned to manipulate your strongest virtue. Here's what happens when someone learns that kindness is your primary motivator. They weaponize it. They deliberately hurt you in ways they know will activate your compassion. They apologize using language they know will trigger your forgiveness. They promise change they know you desperately want to believe in. They've turned your greatest strength into your greatest liability. Your kindness has become the map for how to manipulate you. When you repeatedly forgive people who hurt you, you're broadcasting to the world, I can be manipulated through appeals to your suffering and my compassion. And strategic people learn that lesson instantly. They'll hurt you harder, apologize more profusely, and promise more dramatically, because they know each level of drama activates your rescue instinct. Machiavelli once said, "Good intentions are the most useful disguise for manipulation." You probably think your kindness makes you good. Strategic people use it to make you compliant. Your goodness has become a tool they've learned to use against you. Most people never connect these dots. They think the people who hurt them most are the least kind. Actually, the people who hurt you most often hurt you because they've learned exactly which emotional buttons to push. They've learned how kind you are, and they exploit that knowledge systematically. Powerful people understand something different. Kindness without judgment is naive. Compassion without boundaries is manipulation waiting to happen. They're kind strategically to people who have earned it through consistent respect, and they're ruthless in protecting themselves from people who've demonstrated they'll weaponize that kindness. One system says, I'm kind to everyone, regardless of how they treat me. The other says, I'm kind to people who respect me, and I protect myself from people who don't. One gets manipulated, the other remains safe. Let me give you a concrete scenario. Someone hurt you deeply. When confronted, they cry and apologize profusely, telling you they hate themselves for hurting you. Your compassion activates immediately. You forgive them. But here's what actually happened. They studied your response pattern and learned exactly which emotional expression would disarm you. They'll use that formula again the next time they hurt you. Your kindness has trained them in the art of manipulating you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The people who hurt you most are the ones who've learned to speak the language of your compassion fluently. They've become experts in apologizing to you because they've had so much practice. The tragedy is that you think your kindness makes you superior to people who are less forgiving. It doesn't. It makes you predictable. It makes you manageable. It makes you easy to control. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My kindness is powerful, not exploitable. 6. Consequences become theoretical concepts. Here's the brutal truth nobody wants to face. When you repeatedly forgive without requiring change, consequences stop existing in that person's mental model. They become theoretical, hypothetical, nice ideas that happen to other people in other situations but definitely not to them when they hurt you. Think about the last time you promised yourself that if this person hurt you again, you'd be done. You meant it, but then they hurt you again, and you forgave them. What did they learn? They learned that your consequences are fiction, that you say things you don't mean, that your ultimatums are negotiable. They've learned that this is the last time I'm forgiving you. It's just something you say when you're angry, not an actual boundary. Here's what happens when consequences become theoretical. They lose all power. It's like threatening a child with a punishment you never enforce. Eventually, the child doesn't even hear the threat anymore. They've learned that words aren't connected to action. And now they operate as if no rules exist. Because in their experience, rules don't actually result in consequences. When you've forgiven someone 5 times for the same betrayal, and promised each time was the last, you've established in their mind that your consequences don't exist. They're mythology. They're something you say when you're upset, but you don't actually mean. They've learned they can push and push and push, and you'll absorb it and reset. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Injuries should be inflicted all at once, so that their ills savour being less lasting, may give less offence. He understood that consequences need to be real and enforced, or they're meaningless. You can't build a system where you threaten consequences but never follow through. Eventually, the threats lose all impact. Most people think threats are enough, that if they warn someone, if you do this again, I'm done, the person will change their behaviour. But if you've already not followed through on that threat multiple times, it's not a threat anymore. It's just noise. The person has learned that your words are disconnected from your actions. Powerful people do something different. They don't make threats they won't enforce. When they say, "This ends now," they mean it. When they set a boundary, they maintain it. When they say they're done, they're done. They don't offer repeated chances because they understand that endless chances teach endless disrespect. One system says, "I'll forgive you this time, but next time," and then doesn't enforce it. The other says nothing and enforces through action. One creates false expectations. The other creates real respect. Let me give you a practical scenario. You've told your partner multiple times that if they lie to you again, you're leaving. You mean it each time. But then they lie again, and you confront them, and they apologize, and you forgive them and stay. By the 5th lie and forgiveness cycle, your threat has become a joke. They don't even take it seriously anymore, because they've learned that your "I'm leaving" is just something you say when you're upset. Your consequence doesn't exist. Here's the brutal truth. Consequences you don't enforce don't exist. They're just words. And people learn to ignore words very quickly. The tragedy is that you think your repeated warnings are somehow getting through. They're not. You're teaching people that your boundaries are fiction. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My consequences are real, not theoretical. 7. You never get to experience actual change. Here's the final principle, and it's the most tragic. When you repeatedly forgive without requiring change, you never actually get to experience real transformation from the people you love. You get to experience apologies. You get to experience promises. You get to experience brief moments of hope that maybe this time will be different. But you don't get to experience actual sustained behavioral change. And that's because change requires consequences to motivate it. Think about whether any of the people who hurt you repeatedly have actually changed. Not apologized, not promised, actually transformed their behavior permanently. If the answer is no, it's probably because you've never created enough pressure through consequences to make change necessary. Here's what happens when you repeatedly forgive. You're stuck in an infinite loop of disappointment, followed by false hope. They hurt you, you hurt. They apologize, you believe, you hope, you forgive, you reset. They hurt you again. Same cycle, different day. But no actual growth, no real transformation. Just repetition wearing you down. When you don't require change as the price for reconciliation, people have zero motivation to actually change. They can stay exactly as they are and maintain access to you. It's comfortable. It works. Why would they transform? You've removed the pressure that would push them toward growth. You've created a system where they can keep hurting you and keep being forgiven for it. Machiavelli understood human nature deeply. Men are so simple and obedient to present necessities that he who deceives will always find someone who will let himself be deceived. You're letting yourself be deceived by the promise of change while settling for the repetition of harm. And the person has learned that this is acceptable because it benefits them perfectly. Most people think forgiveness eventually leads to change, that if they're kind enough, patient enough, and forgiving enough, the person will eventually see the error of their ways and transform. This is beautiful thinking. It's also naive. People change when they're forced to by circumstances becoming unbearable, not when someone loves them through the problem indefinitely. Powerful people understand, if you want someone to change, you have to make staying the same more costly than changing. You have to remove the comfort they've become accustomed to. You have to say, I love you, but I won't be part of this pattern anymore. If you're serious about change, I'll support that. But it's going to require real work, not just apologies. One system says, I'll forgive you endlessly while nothing changes. The other says, I'll support your change, but I won't accept repetition. One enables stagnation. The other creates the pressure that produces real growth. Let me give you a concrete example. Your parent has always been critical and dismissive. They've hurt you repeatedly over decades. Each time you confront them, they apologize, you forgive, and the cycle restarts. By now you've realized they've never actually changed. They've gotten better at apologizing, but their fundamental pattern remains identical. Because you've never created consequences that would push them to transform. You've created a system where they can apologize and reset infinitely. Here's the brutal truth. The person you keep forgiving probably isn't going to change. Not because they're incapable, but because you've removed all the pressure that would make change necessary. You've made repetition comfortable. You've made apologies sufficient. You've made change optional. The tragedy is that you're probably holding on to hope that eventually they'll transform and become the person you need them to be. They won't. Not without real consequences. Not without you finally drawing a line and meaning it. And the most tragic part. By the time you finally do that, years will have passed where you could have experienced actual relationships with people who didn't require this much emotional labor. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I deserve people who change, not just apologize. Forgiveness that actually protects you. If you don't establish real consequences for repeated harm, The cycle will continue indefinitely. This isn't about becoming a cold, unforgiving person. This is about understanding that true compassion sometimes means protecting yourself by walking away. About learning that forgiveness and reconciliation are different. You can forgive someone internally while maintaining the distance required to protect yourself from repetition. The most damaging cycles happen when good people believe they're being spiritual by forgiving endlessly. They're not being spiritual. They're being manipulated. They're participating in a system where their goodness is being weaponized against them, where their kindness becomes a justification for accepting repeated harm, where their forgiveness enables someone to remain unchanged. Stop forgiving without requiring change. Stop welcoming people back who haven't transformed. Stop pretending that apologies are evidence of different behavior. Stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's lack of accountability. Stop believing that your endless compassion will eventually inspire them to become better. It won't. Start drawing lines and meaning them. Start telling people that access to you is conditional on respect. Start maintaining distance until you see sustained behavioral change. Start protecting your goodness by making it powerful, not by making it available to anyone willing to hurt you. Start understanding that the kindest thing you can do for someone sometimes is to refuse them until they've earned the right to be trusted again. Machiavelli understood that mercy without enforcement isn't mercy. It's permission. Permission to continue. Permission to hurt again. Permission to never change. True compassion sometimes looks like walking away. True strength sometimes looks like saying no and meaning it. True wisdom sometimes looks like refusing to accept endless apologies from people who'll never become better. The world will never reward your repeated forgiveness. It will mock you for your willingness to accept harm repeatedly. But those who understand that forgiveness and reconciliation are different, who understand that consequences create change, who understand that protecting themselves is not selfish but necessary, those people will finally get to experience actual transformation in the people around them, not because they're heartless, but because they've stopped enabling stagnation. Your goodness is powerful. Guard it, protect it. Make it conditional on respect. Make it a reward for changed behavior, not a given for everyone who hurts you. Make it matter. Make it mean something. If this message opened your eyes to cycles you've been trapped in, hit that like button. Share it with someone trapped in these patterns and needs permission to finally walk away. And subscribe to this channel, because we're going to keep having these real conversations about boundaries that change lives. Respect yourself first. Everything else follows. Now I want you to drop this final affirmation in the comments. I am kind, powerful, and protected. Now go be that person. The world is waiting for you to finally say no and mean it.